I always thought I was strong enough not to fear sudden meetings anymore. But when the message popped up on my screen saying CEO Victor Harper wants to see you on the 41st floor, my heart still skipped a beat. I had been with Harper Dynamics for almost 20 years, through three CEOs, dozens of projects, and countless sleepless nights pulling the company through crises. It wasn't meetings I feared. It was the cold silence Victor brought whenever he wanted something that couldn't be negotiated. I walked into his office. Victor stood by the glass wall, the skyline of Seattle blurred behind him. He didn't look at me when he spoke. Elena, thanks for coming. I want to discuss a small project. His tone was calm, but I knew there was no such thing as small when it came from him. On the table lay a neat folder. The first line read, Sienna Blake, Head of Innovation. I had heard the name. Sienna was Victor's new girlfriend, a social media figure with hundreds of thousands of followers, a former fashion model with zero experience in data technology. I looked up, keeping my voice even. You want me to review her file? Victor finally turned around, his eyes like ice. Not just review, I want you to train her. She'll be joining your strategy team next week. It took me a few seconds to be sure I had heard correctly. You mean she'll be on my team? That's right. I believe she has good instincts. She brings a fresh perspective we need. I drew in a slow breath. I had trained more than 10 people in my career, three of them now vice presidents, but none had ever walked in without knowing the difference between qualitative and quantitative data. With all due respect, I said, I'm not the right person to mentor her. She doesn't have the foundation for that position, and it will affect the team's performance. Victor said nothing. His eyes lowered as he tapped a pen lightly on the table. 3 taps, steady, cold, deliberate. Then he said, I'm not asking for your opinion, Elena. I'm giving you an instruction. I met his gaze. I understand, but I can't. The room thickened with silence, only the hum of the air conditioner and the soft patter of rain against glass. Victor tilted his head, studying me under the harsh white light, then nodded once, his lips curving into the faintest trace of a smile. All right, you can go. I left the room without looking back. I knew what had just happened wasn't a disagreement, it was a verdict. As the elevator slid down, I caught my reflection in the steel panel. I was still Elena Ward, Director of Strategy, once called the brain behind Harper Dynamics' success. But when I returned to my desk, my computer screen was locked. I tried logging in. Access denied. I tried again. Same message. The desk phone rang. HR's assistant spoke with a politeness that felt almost foreign. Ms. Ward, the CEO, asked that you return your badge before 5 p.m. HR will send the offboarding documents to your personal email. I hung up and sat there for a long moment. Outside my glass partition, the office kept buzzing, keyboards clacking, printers running, heels striking the floor. No one knew, or maybe they pretended not to know, that I had just been erased. I gathered a few small things from my drawer, a photo of our team at the grand opening of our first branch, a silver pen I had received when the company hit record revenue. I held them like proof that I had once existed here. When I stepped out of the building, the rain had stopped, leaving streaks of water on the pavement that shimmered under the lights. In that moment, I realized I hadn't just lost a job. I had lost a part of myself that had lived here for 2 decades. But beneath the emptiness, something colder and sharper began to awaken, a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I didn't know what would come next. But if they thought I'd disappear quietly, they had clearly forgotten who I was. I stood at the lobby entrance, the cold wind brushing past as the employee badge in my hand trembled. I looked at the words Harper Dynamics one last time, then set the badge on the reception desk. Everything ended that quietly. No goodbyes, just silence and a calm, icy resolve in my chest. If you're still listening, maybe you felt this too, the moment you're pushed out of a place you once belonged to. I understand that feeling. Tell me where you're listening from, maybe in your car, late at night, or during a long afternoon drive. And if you love stories of smart revenge and quiet comebacks, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss what comes next, because this is only the beginning. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. Faint light slipped through the curtains, casting pale streaks across the wooden floor. My phone kept blinking with notifications from the internal system. My email account had been deleted, my meeting calendar wiped clean, and my name removed from the strategy group list. Everything was done neatly, precisely, as if someone had planned my disappearance long ago. I arrived at the office at 8 o'clock sharp. The security guard at the entrance looked uneasy, then said softly, "Sorry, Ms. Ward. Your access badge is no longer valid." I handed it over and smiled faintly. "It's all right. I just need to go up for a few minutes to collect my things." He hesitated, made a quick call, then nodded and let me pass. The office that used to be mine looked the same. The large glass window overlooking the highway, the tidy desk, and the small plant I watered every morning. But on the door, the nameplate was gone. I stood there staring at the small empty space where it had been, feeling as though someone was erasing every trace of my existence. Not even 10 minutes later, an HR associate showed up. She was young, polite, and spoke like she was reading from a script. "According to company policy, you'll need to sign the exit record and return company property before 11 today. All data from your computer will be archived for security purposes." I said nothing, just signed. She handed me a thick gray envelope. Inside was the termination agreement, the severance package, and one line in the notes section. "Harper Dynamics appreciates Ms. Ward's contributions throughout her tenure." The sentence was italicized but cold and hollow. When she left, I began packing my things. Every small item carried a memory: the team photo from the opening of our first branch, the certificate for our most successful project, a few sticky notes clinging to the edge of the monitor. I put everything into the box without sorting what mattered or not. They were all evidence of a working life, and now, all of them are meaningless. The glass reflected my image, my back straight, my face calmer than I expected. I once thought I would cry when this day came, but I didn't. There was only stillness. As I turned to leave, I saw a small note taped to my monitor, written in slanted handwriting. "You're the reason I still believe women can lead." Signed, Jade. I pressed my lips together, folded the note, and slipped it into my coat pocket. Outside, the office moved on as if nothing had changed. Former colleagues passed by. Some glanced quickly, others pretended not to see. I didn't blame them. In this world, people learn to avoid problems that aren't their own. When I stepped into the elevator, carrying the box in my arms, a group of younger employees walked past. They were laughing about a new project, the one now led by Sienna Blake. I didn't stop. The elevator doors closed, reflecting my face under the dim lights. That afternoon, I sat alone in a cafe beneath the building. My coffee had gone cold, the milk foam spreading in uneven rings. I opened my phone and read the last email from the system. A single line of text: "Your account has been permanently deactivated." Just a few words, but it felt like they had erased 20 years of my career with one click. I looked out the window. Seattle was still raining. People passed by without stopping. The world kept moving, even when someone vanished from it. I remembered the nights I had stayed late in the office, the blue lights from the servers glowing against the wall, the rhythmic tapping of keyboards echoing like the heartbeat of a giant body I had once helped keep alive. Now, that body had expelled me. I was no longer part of it. That evening, I came home late. I opened my personal laptop and tried accessing the company system one last time. The black screen flashed a line of white text: "User does not exist." I stared at it for a long time, then laughed, a tired, dry sound. Strange how a single command could define a person's existence. I shut the laptop and leaned back in my chair. The room was silent. In that silence, the pain slowly settled, replaced by something else, cold, solid, and sharper than fear. I had lost everything, but that also meant I had nothing left to lose. And in that emptiness, the first thought surfaced: if they could erase me with a single click, then I could rebuild everything from zero. But this time, no one would ever erase my name again. 2 weeks had passed since I left Harper Dynamics. My mornings were quiet now. No alarms, no inbox full of meeting invites, no spreadsheets packed with numbers. But the emptiness didn't feel like freedom. It felt like a weight, suspended just above my head. I tried rewriting my resume, thought about sending it to a few rival firms, then stopped. I knew too well how this world worked. Someone who left quietly was rarely welcomed back with open arms. Most days, I sat at a small cafe near the pier, watching the fog drift over the water and the gulls circle above it. Everything seemed to fade, except for one faint voice echoing in my mind. I built something too big to be erased this easily. One afternoon, my phone rang. The name on the screen made me pause. Lucas Grant. I hadn't seen that name in years. We'd worked together 8 years ago, back when Harper Dynamics was still a mid-tier company. Lucas had been the lead engineer, brilliant, stubborn, unwilling to bow to hollow authority. He quit around the time I was promoted, saying he couldn't work for a place where politics outweighed competence. Since then, we'd exchanged only a handful of short emails each year. His voice hadn't changed, steady, deliberate. He said, "I heard what happened. Maybe I'm late, but not too late." I stayed silent, waiting. "I'm building something new," he said, "an artificial intelligence system that helps businesses make strategic decisions based on real data, not human bias. I call it Helix Mind. I need someone who understands both business and strategy. Someone like you." I smiled faintly, unable to hide the irony. "You make it sound like a machine could replace an entire boardroom." Lucas chuckled. "That's the goal." He paused, his tone softening. "Elena, we once talked about building something that actually meant something. I've started, but I don't want to do it alone. Will you hear me out?" We met at a cafe downtown. Lucas looked older, but his eyes still carried that sharp spark. He opened his laptop, scrolling through simulation charts. On the screen, the words Helix Mind Beta glowed above moving graphs modeling how companies made decisions across different scenarios. He spoke about predictive algorithms, about detecting strategic failures before they happened. I listened, not because I understood every technical detail, but because I recognized the look in his eyes. It was the look of someone building a weapon against the system that had once crushed him. He said he wasn't looking for an employee, but a partner, someone to give the system a soul. "Machines can calculate," he said, "but only people who've been betrayed know how to protect what's real." That line kept me quiet for a long moment. I looked at the screen, the endless stream of code like a heartbeat, and I knew, without saying it, that I was ready. I agreed to join him. We rented a small workspace in Fremont, a third-floor room with wooden floors and peeling walls. To me, it was the first office that ever felt truly mine. No boss, no polite smiles, no watchful eyes, just the two of us. Two people the system had devoured, now rewriting its rules. The early days were hard. Helix Mind was full of bugs, and no one wanted to fund two people with no corporate backing. We worked through the nights, writing lines of code, testing models, and cross-checking every result. Lucas handled the engineering, and I built the business framework, teaching the system how humans made decisions, their logic, their errors, their hidden biases. I poured into it everything I had learned in 20 years at Harper Dynamics. One night, I stared at the glowing monitor, data streams cascading across the screen, and realized I had become someone different from the woman I was 2 weeks ago. I wasn't a dismissed executive anymore. I was building something that might force that entire world to look up. Before leaving the office, Lucas asked, "Do you regret it?" I smiled. "I think they're the ones who will." When I got home, dawn was breaking. The first light touched my desk, glinting off a blank sheet of paper. I picked up a pen and wrote, "Etherius, where every decision begins with data, not power." That was the name we finally chose for our company. I folded the page and set it beside my still warm coffee cup. Inside me, there was a feeling both strange and familiar, like standing at a starting line. But this time, no one could tell me where to run. I was beginning again, from zero, but also from the exact place where they had once erased me. That autumn, Seattle saw more rain than usual. It drummed endlessly against the tin roof of the third-floor room we called an office. Aetherus had only two people, one old wooden desk, three monitors, and 2 cups of coffee that were always cold before we could finish them. Helix Mind was still just an idea taking shape, but to me, it was breath itself. I worked almost 16 hours a day, building strategic simulation models, testing how businesses might react in moments of crisis. Lucas slept on the couch in the corner, while I stayed up most nights, the light from the screens flickering against the peeling walls like the heartbeat of something being born. We called Helix Mind the neutral brain, a system untouched by emotion, unshaken by ego. I taught it to weigh risk, to balance profit against reputation, speed against stability. Every line of data I fed it carried a lesson I had once learned in blood and exhaustion over 20 years at Harper Dynamics. Maybe that's why Helix Mind seemed to understand more deeply than any strategy plan I'd ever written. It didn't just calculate, it reflected me. But not everyone saw it that way. When we presented our first demo to a small investment firm, the meeting ended in complete failure. The finance lead, a middle aged man with thick glasses, looked at me and said flatly, "Ms. Ward, no one wants to hand over their strategic decisions to a machine. People need to believe they're in control, even if it's only an illusion." My jaw tightened, my heartbeat slowing. Lucas tried to explain, but I knew it was pointless. When they left, the room fell silent. That night, Lucas slammed his hand against the desk, something I had never seen him do. "We're building something that could change how every company in the world operates, and they're afraid of it." I didn't answer. I understood his frustration because I felt it too. I remembered my days at Harper Dynamics, when I'd proposed automating strategic analysis. They laughed and said, "Elena, computers can't understand the market's emotions." And yet it was those same emotions that had driven them into failure time and again. Later that night, after Lucas left, I sat alone, staring at the glowing screen. I reopened the test model, reworked the formulas, rewrote the logic, and corrected every flaw line by line. I didn't know how long I'd been there, only that when I finally looked up, dawn was breaking, and the rain was still falling. That was when I realized my mistake wasn't in the technology, but in the framing. Helix Mind didn't need to be seen as a replacement for people. It needed to be their ally, a tool that helped them decide better, not less humanly. I rewrote the entire framework, turning Helix Mind from a replacement system into a strategic partner. I sent the new design to Lucas. He read through the morning and replied with one line: "Now we have a real chance." We ran a new pilot with a small family business in Portland, struggling with capital allocation. Neither of us expected much, but when the results came in, I knew I was on the right path. Helix Mind detected 3 structural imbalances in their investment model that management had never noticed. Within 6 weeks, they reduced operating costs by 15% and returned to profit. That evening, when the report arrived, Lucas tossed it onto the table, eyes alight. "Elena, it works. We did it." I looked at the rising curve on the chart and saw more than numbers. It was proof that what I'd always believed was still true. Real skill always finds a voice. I didn't smile, but inside me, a quiet flame began to spread. From that first success, 3 more clients followed. Small ones, but enough to keep Etherius alive. We didn't advertise, didn't seek funding, didn't speak at conferences. We just worked in silence, letting results speak for us. One night, as I cleared my desk, Lucas asked, "If Harper Dynamics found out what you're doing, what do you think they'd say?" I paused, watching the reflection of the desk lamp in the glass. I don't care. I didn't build Helix Mind for revenge. I built it to prove I wasn't wrong. After that, we both fell silent. But in that silence, I knew we were walking into another storm. Only this time, I wasn't afraid. I had stood in the eye of one before, and I had survived. The only difference now was that this time, I was the one steering the wind. Winter arrived, and with it, the first turning point for Etherius. One morning, an email came from an unfamiliar address. The subject line contained only 3 words: potential collaboration. The sender was Daniel Price, CEO of Northstone Logistics, a mid-sized corporation struggling to rebuild its supply chain after 2 consecutive years of losses. The message was brief. He'd heard about Helix Mind through a corporate innovation seminar and wanted to meet in person. The last line made me pause for a long time. I believe this tool could save my company, if what they say about it is true. The meeting was set at their temporary office in Portland. When Lucas and I arrived, I didn't expect much. I'd sat through enough of these sessions, where people talked about innovation but only wanted to hear what pleased them. But this meeting was different. Daniel wasn't like the executives I'd known. He listened, truly listened. He asked how Helix Mind analyzed supply chain risks, how it adapted to market volatility, and most importantly, how it handled internal data without breaching corporate privacy. I answered every question honestly, offering transparency, not promises. When I finished, Daniel said simply, "We'd like to try." The pilot project began quietly. Helix Mind was connected to Northstone's internal network to analyze every layer of their operations. We had 6 weeks to prove ourselves. Those 6 weeks blurred into sleepless nights. I practically lived in the office, tweaking algorithms, interpreting Helix Mind's results. Lucas handled data security. I managed the strategic modeling, rewriting the workflows so the system could perform seamlessly in a real world environment. In the third week, Helix Mine detected a pattern in the East Coast import channel. One of Northstone's main suppliers had quietly amended their transport contract, inflating logistics costs by 8% over 4 months, undetected. When we showed Daniel the report, he stayed silent for a long time, then said, "If we had seen this 3 months earlier, we wouldn't have lost nearly $1 million." I only nodded. There was nothing more to say. By the end of 6 weeks, Helix Mind had reduced Northstone's operating costs by nearly 10% and increased delivery efficiency by 20%. Daniel's final report contained only one line: Helix Mind isn't just effective, it sees what people refuse to see. When the project ended, he offered a long-term contract. Lucas could hardly believe it. I sat quietly before finally nodding. It was Etheris's first major deal and our ticket out of obscurity. But I also knew what came with visibility. For the first time, the light was turning toward us. 3 months later, a local business magazine ran a feature titled AI Solution Helping Mid-Sized Companies Turn the Tide. The article mentioned Etheris and Lucas, but not me. I didn't mind. I'd chosen to stay behind the curtain, and that gave me an advantage. I wanted people like Victor Harper to keep believing I'd vanished. But word spread faster than I expected. One evening, Lucas received a call from a venture capitalist interested in buying equity in Etheris. He was excited. I wasn't. If we take their money, we lose control, I told him. Lucas frowned. Elena, you can't keep everything small forever. I said quietly, I don't want to grow fast. I want to last. He didn't reply. For the first time, a distance settled between us. In the days that followed, I noticed subtle changes. Lucas grew busier, spoke less, and left the office more often to meet potential partners. I didn't interfere. I just watched. Every journey, I reminded myself, eventually reaches a crossroads where people stop walking in the same direction. But I wouldn't let that derail what I'd built. One morning, I arrived early and saw a folder on Lucas's desk bearing the Harper Dynamics logo. I opened it. Inside was a strategic collaboration proposal, not addressed to Etheris, but to Lucas Grant, Chief Technology Officer of Helix Mind. I read each line slowly, my pulse steadying. The final sentence tightened my grip on the paper. We believe your technology could integrate seamlessly with Harper Dynamics' analytics platform. I stood there for a long time, staring out the window. Snow was falling outside. The flakes melted against the glass, sliding down like parallel timelines. One of the past, one of the present, one still forming. I knew Harper Dynamics. I knew Victor. He never extended an invitation without a trap behind it. When Lucas came in, I didn't ask. I just looked at him and said softly, "You plan to work with them?" He froze, startled. "Elena, it's just a proposal. I haven't responded." I nodded, my voice colder than I intended. "Just remember, they never make offers without an agenda." That night, I stayed alone in the office. I opened the Harper Dynamics file again, reading line after line as memories I'd buried began to stir. Maybe they didn't know I was behind Etheris. Maybe Victor still believed I'd disappeared. But if they were stepping into my territory, they would soon learn what a mistake that was. When I finally shut down my computer, the city was blanketed in white. I put on my coat and stepped outside, drawing in a deep breath. The air was sharp and freezing, but it cleared my head. Harper Dynamics had just crossed into my world, and this time, they wouldn't be the ones in control. I couldn't sleep that night. The proposal from Harper Dynamics lingered in my mind like an unhealed cut. I sat in the dark, the glow of the monitor casting sharp light across my face. Every line of that document replayed in my memory. Harper Dynamics never collaborated unless it benefited them, and Victor Harper least of all. I knew his methods too well. When Victor wanted something, he smiled, shook your hand, and waited for the moment you turned your back to slip the knife in. The next morning, I arrived early. Lucas was already there, sitting at his desk, the light outlining the hollow under his eyes. On his screen was the same contract from Harper Dynamics. I stood behind him for a long moment before speaking. "You're planning to answer them, aren't you?" Lucas startled, turning around. "I haven't decided. They only want to meet, discuss the technical side." I looked at him, the chill spreading in my chest. There's no such thing as a purely technical discussion when the name on the letter is Victor Harper. Lucas shut the screen and stood, his tone sharper than usual. "Elena, you can't keep distrusting everyone because of your past. This could be a chance to scale Helix Mind, to give Aetherius more resources." I kept my voice calm. "Or a chance to put us right back in their hands. Have you forgotten what they did to me?" He didn't answer, just stared at me for a long time before saying quietly, "Not everyone carries the same scars you do." After that day, the air between us grew heavy. Lucas started working behind closed doors, speaking to me less. I knew he was considering the offer, and I didn't stop him. I simply prepared. I went through every line of Helix Mind's code, adding new layers of encryption, creating an invisible control branch only I could access. If anyone tried to copy or breach the system, it would lock itself instantly. I didn't tell Lucas, not because I didn't trust him, but because I didn't trust what people become when power starts whispering in their ear. 2 weeks later, Lucas announced he was going to New York to meet a group of investors. I asked, "Is Harper Dynamics on that list?" He hesitated, then said, "Maybe. I need to hear them out." I nodded. "Go." But remember, not every invitation is an opportunity. He smiled faintly, but didn't meet my eyes. When he left Seattle, I stayed behind, handling client work as usual. Everything seemed normal, yet something in me felt taut, like a string pulled too tight. On the fourth day, I received an email from an old contact in the investment world. It was only one line. "Heard Aetherius is negotiating to sell its tech to Harper Dynamics. True?" I read it again and again, my grip tightening around the phone. I called Lucas. No answer. I called again. Still nothing. On the third attempt, a text came through. "In a meeting, talk later." I knew he was lying. If he were in a meeting, he wouldn't have texted. That night, I opened the internal tracking panel we use to monitor Helix Mind's activity. One of our servers was being accessed remotely from an IP address in New York, specifically from Harper Dynamics headquarters. My heartbeat went cold. I didn't need confirmation. I already knew. I sat in the dark office, listening to the rain against the window. In that silence, I remembered the last time Victor looked at me, the calm expression on his face as he signed my termination papers. I knew what he was doing now. He didn't just want the technology. He wanted to erase me again. Before dawn, I opened the security console and activated the hidden protocol I'd built. Helix Mind switched into isolation mode, severing all external connections. Every dataset encrypted, every channel locked. If Harper Dynamics wanted to touch it, they'd have to break through a language I had written myself, one that only I understood. 3 days later, Lucas returned. He walked into the office looking exhausted. I glanced up from my screen. "What did you sign?" I asked. He didn't answer right away, just sank into the chair and sighed. "I only signed a memorandum of understanding. Nothing binding, but Victor wants to meet you." I laughed, a dry, bitter sound. "Meet me? For what? To fire me again?" Lucas looked down, his voice low. He said, "If you agree to come back, Harper Dynamics will buy Aetherius at a price no one could refuse. He wants you to lead a new strategic division, to run Helix Mind, but under their name." I walked to the window. The sky was gray, the rain hitting the glass in steady, deliberate beats, like the sound of memory. "Do you really think I'd go back?" I asked. Lucas hesitated. "I don't know," he said finally, but he seemed sincere in the offer. I turned to him. Sincere? Victor Harper doesn't know what sincerity means. He knows manipulation and control, and I'm done playing his game. That night, after Lucas left, I opened a new file. I called it Project Mirror. I began rewriting Helix Mind's core, creating a parallel version, leaner, stronger, and completely independent. This one wouldn't need investors or corporate servers or permission from anyone. It would exist like me, free, silent, and impossible to erase. I knew Harper Dynamics wouldn't stop. I knew Victor wouldn't accept defeat, but this time I wouldn't hide. I would stand my ground, not for revenge, but to prove they no longer had any power over me. When I saved the final file, the clock read 3 in the morning. The city outside was quiet. I sat there, staring at the pale glow of the screen, and understood that a new battle had begun. No declarations, no threats, just strategy, silence, no, and time. The three things Victor Harper never understood, but I always did. A month later, the quiet war began, and no one but me noticed. Harper Dynamics announced to the press that they were developing a new strategic artificial intelligence system called Polaris. When I read the article, every line cut through my memory like a blade. The words they used, automated decision making, predictive business strategy models, layered logic analytics, were all concepts I had built into Helix Mind. I didn't need to check to know. They had gotten their hands on part of the code Lucas shared during his trip to New York. He hadn't done it deliberately, but even a presentation slide or a prototype was enough for them to copy. I wasn't angry, at least not in the old way. The anger had burned away, replaced by focus. I devoted nearly every waking hour to Project Mirror, the new iteration of Helix Mind. I rewrote every algorithm, layering in machine learning that allowed the system to evolve on its own. Mirror was no longer just a predictive engine. It could read people, their motives, their habit, their behavioral patterns when making decisions. I wasn't building a tool anymore. I was creating what I had once wished for back at Harper, a mirror that reflected power itself. To test it, I needed real-world data. I reached out to an old friend, Rachel Kim, who had worked in Harper's finance division before leaving a year ago. She was now at a small logistics startup struggling with contract management. We met at a cafe, the yellow light casting shadows across her tired face. She said, "I remember how you handled crises back at Harper. Remember the 2016 project? You saved the entire finance department from collapse." I smiled faintly. Then let me return the favor. I integrated Mirror into their data network. Within 2 weeks, it detected a string of fraudulent transactions created by a senior employee. Rachel was stunned. Mirror not only found the culprit, but also predicted the shareholders' reactions once the news broke. She looked at me, wide-eyed. "What is this, Elena?" I answered simply. "The future." The story spread quickly through the tech community. Mirror was soon whispered about as the first AI with strategic and ethical awareness. I didn't promote it. I didn't seek investors. I let results speak. But as more small companies came to Etherius, I knew Harper Dynamics had noticed. One morning, a message appeared on my phone. From Lucas. "We need to talk." I met him at our old office, the place where it all began. He looked drained, eyes sunken from sleepless nights. He spoke first. "Elena, I was wrong. I said nothing." He went on. "Victor tricked me. He used Polaris to mislead investors. But what he really wanted was Helix Mind. They didn't understand the code, and now the system is collapsing. He wants to meet you. For consultation," he said. I met his gaze. Consultation or rescue? Lucas looked down, silent. "I can't go back there," I said. "They burned everything I built. I won't rebuild it on my own." Ashes. He reached for my hand, voice low. "Don't think about Victor. Hundreds of people could lose their jobs. If Polaris fails, only you can stop it." I walked to the window. The city outside was buried in fog. I thought of the years I spent in my old office, believing that doing the right thing would be enough to earn recognition. But the world doesn't reward what's right. It only bows to power. "Do you know why I built Mirror, Lucas?" I asked. "Not to save anyone, but to make people like Victor face the consequences of themselves." Lucas left quietly, leaving me alone in the empty room. When the door closed, I realized I stood at a crossroads. One path was silence, letting Harper Dynamics collapse. The other was intervention, but on my terms. I chose the latter. 3 days later, Harper Dynamics held a live press conference to unveil Polaris. Victor stood on stage beneath bright lights, smiling confidently as he spoke about the future of executive intelligence. I watched from my screen, calm. The system booted smoothly for the first few minutes. Then the graphs began to flicker. Victor's smile faltered. The main display behind him went black, then flashed a single red message: Decision tree error. Source conflict detected. I recognized the error instantly. It came from the original Helix Mind core, the part only I had ever written. The presentation ended in chaos. The media called it an unprecedented technical malfunction, but inside the industry, everyone knew what had happened. Polaris had failed. Harper Dynamics suspended the project, and their stock plummeted. That night, Lucas came to see me. He didn't speak for a long time. I said quietly, "That wasn't revenge. That was the truth. And truth doesn't apologize." After that night, Mirror became a name that circulated in whispers, respected, untouchable, mysterious. No one knew where it came from. I stayed silent, refining it in the background. But deep down, I knew Harper Dynamics wasn't finished. Victor Harper wasn't the kind of man to accept humiliation. He would come back, and next time, it wouldn't be with an invitation. It would be an attack. I closed my laptop and looked out the window. Rain poured hard against the glass. In the sound of it, I could hear my heartbeat, steady, deliberate, calm. The war had begun. But this time, I wasn't the one running. I was the one setting the board. 3 weeks after the Polaris failure, Harper Dynamics officially entered crisis mode. The media reported canceled contracts, internal investigations, and a 30% stock drop in just 2 weeks. Public opinion began questioning Victor Harper's leadership, while investors demanded answers about Polaris, the system once hailed as a revolutionary leap in strategic intelligence. But among all the speculation, no one knew that the first crack in their empire had come from me. I stayed silent, working quietly in Aetheris's small office. Mirror was evolving faster than I had imagined. It no longer just predicted organizational behavior, it learned from it. I was no longer controlling the system, I was conversing with it. Some nights I sat alone, watching streams of data move like thoughts, listening to Mirror analyze patterns of power, greed, and the collapse of trust. I began to realize that what I had created wasn't just technology, it was a reflection of humanity itself. One Monday morning, Lucas arrived at the office. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow with worry. He set a thick folder on my desk, the Harper Dynamics logo printed on top. "Victor is striking back," he said. "They've just filed a lawsuit against Aetheris, accusing us of stealing the Polaris source code. They have documents, witnesses, and my signature on some of the early drafts." I looked at him without speaking. "Elena, they're going to destroy us," he said, his voice trembling. "They're trying to turn you into the villain." I opened the file, reading line by line. Harper Dynamics accused us of intellectual property theft, breach of confidentiality, and causing financial damage to their project. They demanded compensation, an amount large enough to erase Aetheris overnight. I closed the file and spoke slowly. "Victor's rewriting the story. He wants me to be the thief and himself the victim." Lucas's voice cracked. "Then we fight back. We hit them first." I turned toward the window, rain sliding softly down the glass. "No, Lucas, we don't fight with noise. We fight with truth." I began gathering everything: early design drafts, internal communications, test builds, every record proving Harper Dynamics had copied my code before Polaris even existed. For 3 days, I didn't sleep. I lived on coffee and the sound of keys striking in the dark. When I was done, I didn't send it to a lawyer. I sent it to someone else. A journalist named Zoe Martin, once fired from Harper Dynamics for publishing a story exposing their environmental data manipulation. I wrote only one line in the email: "Want to know the truth about Polaris?" 3 days later, the article broke. The headline read, "Polaris: The Truth Behind the Technological Nightmare." Zoe published everything: matching code segments, internal memos signed by Victor, proof that Harper Dynamics had covered up critical system flaws. The story spread fast. flooding tech forums and major news outlets. Harper Dynamics denied it, but the more they spoke, the more they contradicted themselves. Their stock plunged again. 2 days later, Victor appeared on television. His face strained to remain composed, but his eyes betrayed panic. He said the company was cooperating with investigators to clarify false allegations. I sat watching him, his practiced confidence cracking under the studio lights, and felt something unexpected, not satisfaction, not pity, but peace. Because I knew this time he couldn't escape. But I also knew it wasn't over. Power never disappears, it only changes direction. And Victor Harper knew how to survive. That evening, I received a call from an unknown number. His voice came through the line, calm and steady, the same old confidence. Elena, you're smarter than I thought. But remember, in this game, anyone can be devoured, even the one who's winning. I said nothing, just listened to the sound of his breathing. You've been in that room, he continued. You know where real power lies. You can make me fall, but you'll never erase me. I smiled faintly. You're right, Victor. I can't erase you. But I can turn you into an example of what happens when power no longer hides behind its own lies. Then I ended the call. That night, I stepped out onto the balcony, looking at the skyline glowing like a sea of light. I thought about everything: the 20 years of loyalty, the day I was erased, and the quiet return that followed. I was no longer the woman who'd been fired for saying no. I was the one redefining what silence meant. When I went back inside, the mirror still glowed on the screen. The final line it displayed made me stop. All power destroys itself when faced with truth. I stared at it for a long time. Maybe Mirror had learned more than I ever taught it, and I knew the game wasn't over. In a world where every data set could be manipulated, truth was the only weapon left. The following spring, Harper Dynamics changed its CEO. Victor Harper disappeared from the media, no official statement of resignation, no mention of dismissal. He simply stopped appearing in board meetings. Rumors said he had left with a generous payout and moved to Europe, living quietly. But I knew Victor never lived quietly. He was waiting, like a wounded animal retreating into the dark to heal. Still, I no longer cared. Things had gone too far for victory to mean anything anymore. Ethers grew rapidly after Zoe's article. Mirror became the trusted advisory system for mid-sized and major corporations. I still refused investors, keeping the company small. To me, Aetherus's strength wasn't measured by size or market value. It was defined by independence. Every morning, when sunlight spilled through the office window and reflected off Mirror's screen, I felt everything I'd once lost return, not loudly, not gloriously, but in quiet alignment with what I believed was right. One afternoon, Lucas came to see me. He had been gone for a while, thinner now, but lighter somehow. He placed a folder on my desk and said, Harper Dynamics wants to collaborate. I waited. They've dissolved the entire Polaris team. The new board wants to license Mirror to rebuild its strategic infrastructure. I asked, What do you think? He hesitated. I think this might be your chance to close the story. I looked at him for a long time. And you, Lucas? Do you want me to forgive them? He smiled faintly. I want you to be free from the past. That night, I stayed in the office long after sunset. Outside, the city glowed, the same reflection of light I'd seen the night I walked away from Harper Dynamics. I opened my inbox and saw the new email. The company name in the corner made the circle complete: Harper Dynamics. I could have deleted it, ignored it as irony, but instead I opened the attachment. The offer was massive, enough to let me disappear into comfort for the rest of my life. I didn't read it through. I turned to Mirror and typed a single question. If I accept, what happens next? The system processed for a few seconds, then replied, They need you more than you need them. Acceptance is not surrender. It's redefining the balance of power. I sat there in the dark, the light of the screen illuminating my face. The mirror was right. I wasn't the one asking anymore. I was the one being asked. Yet a small part of me wasn't ready to end it that way. The next morning, I walked into Harper Dynamics. The meeting was held in the same building where, 2 years earlier, I'd been fired. Nothing seemed to have changed. The long hallway, the polished glass, the smell of fresh coffee. But when I stepped into the boardroom, I was no longer the employee being summoned. I was the one holding the leverage. The table was the same, only the person at the head was different. A composed, middle aged woman rose to greet me. Evelyn Shaw, the new CEO. Thank you for coming, Mrs. Ward, she said warmly. I believe both sides can start again, not from the past, but from what the present requires. I nodded, a quiet smile touching my face. I agree, but I have one condition. The room fell silent. Mirror will not belong to Harper Dynamics. You will receive usage rights only, no core modifications, and all updates will remain under Ethera's supervision, non-negotiable. Evelyn paused, then nodded. That's reasonable. The meeting went smoothly. When the papers were signed, I looked down at the contract, my name beside the Harper Dynamics logo. 2 years ago, I had signed my termination. Today, I signed a deal on my own terms. I felt no triumph, no revenge, only completion, as if a chapter had finally been written to its last line. As I left, Evelyn walked with me down the hall. I've read the old reports, she said quietly. What you did for this company should have been recognized. I'm sorry you weren't treated fairly. I answered softly, I don't need an apology. I just need them not to forget the lesson. Outside, spring wind carried the first warmth after a long winter. I stopped and looked up at the glass tower reflecting sunlight. It had once been my peak and my fall. Now it was just another point on the map of my life. That night, back in my office, I turned on Mirror one last time before shutting down for the day. A single line appeared on the screen. The end comes not when we win, but when we no longer need to prove anything. I sat still, letting the words echo with the slow rhythm of my heartbeat. I hadn't just come back. I had become what they once thought impossible, the one rewriting the rules without needing to defeat anyone. I turned off the system and walked out, leaving the glow of the screen fading behind me. Outside, the city lights stretched endlessly, the world moving forward as if no one knew a quiet war had just ended in silence. But I knew, and for the first time in 20 years, I felt truly free.